So good day. I want to talk about speaker placement in a short video. So let's start out with the types of speaker setup you have. That's near field, midfield. It's not really a thing, but I will explain later. And the far field. So what is near field? Near field is in and around a meter or 3 foot away. It's dominated by the direct radiated sound from a speaker, usually found in home recording studios. Professional recording studios can get into the midfield, and some are even in the far field when you get into really big studios. But also like mixing at PS Audio is done in far field setup. Little power is needed for higher SPLs. They're usually relatively inefficient speakers that measure really flat, and so even then you still don't need a lot of power because you're at 1 meter away. Okay, this is a simple example of a near field setup. You have 2 speakers, your left and right channel, you're here, and this is approximately the same. It's an equilateral triangle, so the speakers are as far away as you are from them. This is a relatively general setup. You can try different things. There are a lot of rules. Jesko from AcousticsInsider.com has a lot of videos about really good home recording studio setups, and I will share some of his tips, but check him out. He's an absolute genius in this stuff. So then we have the far field, because I want to save the midfield for last. Far field is 2 meters or more, or 7 foot. 7 foot is a little bit over 2 meters, but you get the drift. Mostly room sound, so the further you get away from an object in a room, the more the reflections inside the room start to dominate the total sound of the speaker, or of what you're hearing. You obviously need bigger rooms, since when you want to be 2 meters away from a speaker and or more, then you need 2 meters, more than a multiple of that for yourself and the speakers and everything else, to be set up proper. Setup rules are true free-for-all with some guiding rules. Things like Wasp Wilson Audio speaker setup, Lots from New Record Day, and you have a few more that focus on far field setups, and they're all good. I prefer Wasp. They gave me the best bass in room that I've ever had. So check that out if you want to set up your speakers in the far field. It also kind of works for midfield, but you need more power, since you drop a lot of energy into the room. So when you have a relatively inefficient speaker, most speakers are around 85 to 90 decibels, and if you want to reach decent SPL, then you need bigger amps. Think 100 watts to really get things singing when you're 3-4 meters away from your speaker. And big power is getting more affordable, but good big power is still expensive, while small amps have always small Fleetwood amplifiers have always sounded good. with near field setup, so you can get away with less power. This is a simple overview. This was when I set up my horn speakers inside the living room downstairs. Personally, it wasn't for me. There was a lot of problems with the setup. Even the small Flea Watt amp and the high efficiency speakers, the amp just couldn't handle the speakers when they were that far away, and even bigger amps had a real hard time fixing, especially bass inside this room, since you need a lot of power to control those drivers inside or when you're that far away from it. So then we come to the midfield. I am biased. Most of my good experiences with speaker setup come from the midfield. My current setup is midfield, and I will explain what it is. It's technically not a thing. It's sort of an in-between. I define midfield as right on the edge of the transition point where room reverberation starts to take over from direct radiated sound from the speaker. I define midfield as where they are the same. So that's approximately 2 meters, or just under that, just over that. So it's around that boundary point, and it's suitable for smaller rooms, like a spare bedroom. The spare room that I'm in right now, which I use as a office, man cave, whatever you want to call it, it's quite big. But only half of the space is directly used for audio only, so that makes it more of a 3x4 or 3x3 room that you will see in houses that you can use when the kids are out of the house or whatever. In my opinion, you have best of both worlds in terms of power. We have a little bit more sensitive speakers. You can get away with tiny watt amps. If you play pop music, you can definitely get away with it. If you want to play classical, that kind of thing, you gonna need more power, because you have a bit more of a dynamic headroom needed. Subwoofer setup is relatively easy, in my opinion, because you can set up the subwoofers in the near field. A lot of people will probably disagree with me on that, but I have found that when you are at that boundary position where, again, room interaction and direct radiated sound are pretty much the same, the subwoofer integration, you don't get the biggest swings from either your speakers or the subwoofer. My room is treated, so that also helps, and I have treatment available at any time. I can just make more. That's really easy. So subwoofer integration is quite easy, because you can set up a sub in less than a meter distance, and that will get you out of a lot of trouble, because you don't have to put as much energy in the room. So this is my old setup. It wasn't ideal because my head was in the middle of the room, so I had a lot of nulls. I believe in the latest version of this setup, and the speakers were a bit farther back where they were in that little Wasp, the Wilson Audio speaker setup box of neutrality. Best bass I've ever had, but the room setup wasn't ideal since my computer where I'm recording this now is right here, and the chair was interfering with the desk and everything was so tight and you couldn't really get around the room. So I changed it because I wanted to try a long wall setup, and that's this. This is my current setup. This speaker where my mouse is right now, that's the subwoofer. So it's pretty much an equilateral triangle in a relatively easy setup. The couch is here, my head is close to a wall, which should not be ideal, but again, you don't put as much energy inside the room when you have everything closer to you. So swings can be relatively drastic, but they're still relatively easy to control. You have massive soundstage because this just radiates right on through, and you have scale. Like an orchestra can still sound big with this setup, whereas near field can't do that, and far field it's really hard to set up right. So my personal experience, again, near field soundstage is too small, and when things start to scale properly, it sounds really far away. The far field is hard to get soundstage correctly. In the living room, everything pulled down. Always, I didn't get any soundstage height. So the scale of it was just really hard to get right, and without being able to treat the living room with acoustic treatment, I just didn't want to bother. That's also a thing with like near field and midfield setups, is you have it, usually you can do it in a smaller room that's dedicated to audio, and especially here in Europe, we do not have big rooms, so that's a plus. The midfield, best experience for me. Skill can vary with recordings a lot. That's kind of a thing. Like something that sounds really big, like an orchestra sound can be really big, but like songs like Paramore's Ain't It Fun, it sounds so small. It sounds so ridiculously small. It sounds far away, it sounds tiny. It's like sitting in the back row of a theater or a performance room. It's not really a thing. So here is the end of the presentation. Now I want to take you to the measurement section of this presentation. So here I have two frequency responses. The dark green one is from my old speaker setup with this subwoofer in place. The photo I showed, there wasn't one. This was before Wasp. I have a big dip here. It's relatively flat. It's not really ideal, to say the least. And the orange one is my current setup. I have this massive hole at 153 Hertz. I can't really seem to get rid of it. It's some kind of speaker interaction. It's almost like they're out of phase. I think it's a driver issue. I really need to look into this. But overall, when we go to a let me turn off the phase. When we go to a response from 20 to 20 kilohertz, okay, that's a bit much. So from 15 to 20 kilohertz, you see that this slopes down really nicely and follows the line that Floyd Toole proposed is a decent in-room response. This last bit is probably the speakers not really being exactly the same distance apart. But as you can see, it's a really good, nice and flat round. This is 1/24th smoothing, but it's a nice response. I really like this setup. Let's do it. Go to the spectrogram. Only below 30 hertz does the room really starts to get a bit out of hand. This 55 hertz note sounds a bit hard, and you can hear this dip from time to time, but it's really hard to find because a lot of music lives here and here, and I don't really notice it in music that this dip is here. So that was my short video on speaker setup. When you have a room EQ wizard, you can go to Room Sim, and then this thing opens, and this is the little diagram you get. You have some controls here of what your rooms, what your speakers do. So in this situation I have 2 subwoofers and 2 main speakers that are sealed and have a band limited 80 hertz. So you can add delay, you can do a lot of stuff to try and find what works for you. It works especially well when you have a extremely like a box shaped room. My room is not box shaped, it's L shaped, so I don't really use it that much, but it can be really fun to use and see what it does when you do have a room that follows this general shape. You can change height of everything in here. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in another video.